The hospital chaplain rang me the other day and asked if I would go on his behalf to anoint a dying man because he was caught up in a meeting. I went gladly. It's one of the parts of the ministry that I particularly enjoy. I'd run out of the oil of the sick because our stocks weren't replenished as usual at Easter. But I looked up on the internet and I found that I was able to consecrate oil myself, though interestingly only on a person to person basis. I wrote down the formula that I had to use. I poured some olive oil from the bottle in my kitchen into the oil stock, and I ventured out. After anointing the gentleman, who, thank God, was able to discern that I was a priest and join in as best as he was able the rite and consciously to receive the graces of the sacrament, I walked out of the hospital into the bright sunshine, and there, looming over me, was the vast edifice of Lister's Mill, the continuing symbol of Bradford's economic preeminence in the 19th century. It continued in operation until the 1980s, if I remember rightly. Now much of it has been converted into apartments, whilst other parts are boarded up with danger signs and bushes grow perilously from gutters. I walked the short distance to the site of the house where my dad grew up, from which he went to war and to which he returned, and where he remained living with my grandparents until he married in his early 30s. It was the first time I had stood on this site, though I've passed it a number of times in the car. There is now a cafe there and a shop selling women's clothing in the Asian style. It's a deprived area, an area where immigrants congregate. First, there were the Irish immigrants, such as my grandfather, who came here in the early 20s from County Roscommon, and who was, according to his marriage certificate, a copy of which I have, a corporation labourer. Then there were Pakistani immigrants, many of whom worked in the mills before these began to close down in the face of competition from abroad. Now there are other ethnic groups evident, from Eastern Europe, for example, and also from more far-flung places like Eritrea. As I wandered around, slightly self-consciously, fearing that somebody might ask me what I was doing, I became newly aware of just how massive Lister's Mill is. It must have been a bit oppressive to grow up practically next door to it. Once when I was a seminarian, I visited an imposing Renaissance palace in Florence. Its striking stone facade, the guidebook told me, was designed to instill fear in other potentially hostile Florentine families. Lister's Mill sends out a similar message to me. And yet my dad, I remember, said that when he was a boy, the first sound that he would hear upon waking was the laughter of the mill girls going to work. I've been reading about the history of Bradford during the lockdown, and I've learned that Lister's Mill, named after its owner, Samuel Lister, or Manningham Mill, as it was also known as, was the scene of an extraordinary event in 1891. The 5,000 employees, mostly women, went on strike for 19 weeks in response to wage cuts before destitution forced them to return to work at the lesser rate. 2 years later, just down the road, the Independent Labour Party was formed. I returned to my car, deep in thought, conscious above all about how quickly our society is changing. The textile industry has all but vanished from Bradford. Now it seems that we are already effectively in a recession, and many people will lose their jobs despite the government's current employment retention scheme. And more than one commentator has suggested that the idea of people congregating in large numbers for work will become increasingly a thing of the past, given how useful IT has proved during the lockdown. And people have also wondered whether the people will congregate in our churches in the same numbers after the lockdown. Certainly older people, who constitute such a large proportion of our congregations, will be wise to be cautious. But younger people may also simply get out of the habit. A young Polish woman, a member of the recent wave of immigrants, said to me the other day on the phone, "Oh, it's much better now, Father. I don't get stressed getting all the children to Mass at St. Winifred's on time. We just sit on the sofa and I can concentrate better on my prayers." And then the cruelest cut of all, we watched the Polish Mass. She was loving my discomfiture. There was laughter in her voice. And then as I pulled out, passing alongside Lister's Mill, such an historic building for the nation and also for my family, another thought struck me. Many people see the church as just such an imposing institution and they are frightened by it. I didn't want to entertain such an idea. It seemed a bit disloyal to the community I represent. But the veracity of what had flashed through my mind was not something I could easily deny. Many people view the Catholic Church not as the instrument through which the all-merciful Christ ministers to us in our brokenness, but as a tribunal which judges us and finds us wanting. What a splendid challenge it is, I thought as I turned left down Wetley Hill, epicentre of the 2001 Bradford riots, that we as a church should be entrusted with reproposing the gospel precisely now, in this cultural moment, and I personally, in this splendid city, Yorkshire's finest. Thank you for coming in, the doctor had said, looking up over her notes as I had left the hospital, with a smile, eager to catch my eye, evidently wishing to convey to me in that moment her esteem for that institution which she perceived affords people that deep peace for which everybody in our fractured society yearns.